Fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Ave Maria Stella Dei Mater Alma ad semper Virgo Felix
Hey, welcome everybody back. Steve with Sus Fidelity coming at you once again with Don Brohawn and Michael Greaney of the Center for Economic and Social Justice. Yes, I almost pulled the WEF again. That's twice, second time in a week. Co-authors of the book Economic Personalism, which if you haven't gotten, it's available at, unfortunately, Jeff Bezos' Amazon Corporation. So you have to get it there. Solid book. About 120 pages, I think it was.
152.
152. I was within.
Like Amazon, you can always go to Barnes & Noble.
Or Barnes & Noble, yes. That is.
Also available, I hate to sound like a commercial, many brick and mortar bookstores by special order since it's in the Ingram catalog. Or you can download a free copy from the CESJ website.
And if you act now, operators are standing by. You can get something free at his website. Just check out his website. Anyways, good morning, Michael, Don. Thanks for coming on again.
It's great to be back.
So last time we talked about property. It's like as the whole vision of the 2030 was their infamous video of you will own nothing and be happy. And so last time, we talked about private property as ownership and control. Now we get to the question of who pays for it and how.
Right. I'll take a shot at that. What we're talking about here is private property and how you distribute to every person those rights to make sure that they can actually exercise them, and specifically in an economy. And that's one of the functions of money, is a way to track what people are promising and what people owe, and to make sure that there's always something of value whatever, if it's currency, it represents something of value. If you are expecting from that piece of paper that you're going to be able to get something, and you're entitled to it, and you don't get that thing, well, someone has violated your private property rights. So private property that's really at the heart in terms of economic power, that each person can have a definable measure. They will know what they are due. When you don't have that kind of certainty about the value, that there is something standing behind that promise, then you don't really know what your rights are going to be within the social context or the economy. So it's very important that people first, as we talked about the last show, understand that each of us needs to have the private property, as this is a universal human right. And as Mike also explained in the last show, how you exercise it, that's very important. You can't harm other people or society or the common good. You have to use it responsibly, but it is telling you what your rights are. So when we're going to look at, when you ask the question, who will pay for it, maybe just to clarify, we're looking at how people will be able to get the things, the economic goods and services that they need. And if you start from the premise that you don't need private property, you don't need to own, you're still going to have that question, who's going to produce? How are they going to be rewarded, if at all? And how do we determine what each of us then is due from what is produced? And so, I think starting with at that point, it's still a question of rights and making sure those rights are upheld. And it also becomes a question of responsibility of the owner. And I think this was something that we had talked about in CESJs, the classical notion of rights and duties. Meaning, I have the right, you have the duty to do whatever my right says I'm entitled to. And so this is starting from the owner, and you must fulfill that, whether it's the government or someone else. Another way of looking at that is to say, I as the owner also have a responsibility in how I exercise my rights. So when it's going to come down to money, I can't just go issuing something, a piece of paper, and say, oh, well, this entitles me to, get $1 million worth of what you just produced.
Here's my $1,000 note.
Yeah, exactly. So laying that as the introduction, then Mike can expound more deeply on this.
I'll try to find the song "Money, Money, Money."
You're in the money from the gold diggers in 1930.
Oh yeah, that's what you're in the money.
Not gold rubies at all. No. Basically, it boils down to power. Who's going to have it? And, I mean, this is almost the last chance I have to say this. Exactly 200 years ago, in 1820, Daniel Webster noted that power naturally and necessarily follows property. And as Louis Kelso reiterated in, I think it was an article in the American Bar Association Journal in 1956 with the terrible title, Karl Marx, the Almost Capitalist, property in everyday life means control. Correct, Don can go better. But basically, power, control, and property. The reason private property is important, especially in something like Catholic social teaching, or actually in the ethics of any faith or philosophy, is that you need power to take control over your own life. If you don't have private property in what generates your income, the means by which you survive, your life and liberty are endangered by whoever does control your income or your means of subsistence. So that this is why, for example, Daniel Webster and Benjamin Watkins Lee of Virginia, that's Leigh, not Lee, by the way, insisted that in order to be able to vote, you should have property. Well,
it's skin in the game.
Backwards. What they should have said is we should make certain that every voter can have access to the means of becoming an owner, not restrict the vote only to people who have property. Because there may be good and sufficient reasons why someone doesn't want to own. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but there are good reasons to do almost anything legitimate.
Yeah, when you say, Mike, that, for example, someone who takes a vow of poverty is voluntarily not giving up their inherent right, but saying they're not going to exercise it, that they will leave that power to decide, what I get and how I produce an income. I will not personally have to be worrying about this because I'm in a group which, we all have a certain level of trust and common purpose. So that, I think, but that's not, you can't extract that natural right from a person. It's always there to reclaim if they so choose.
Yeah, and Dawn's exactly right. This is, in fact, why Chesterton, in my opinion, wrote his first book after becoming a Catholic in 1922 on St. Francis of Assisi. See, St. Francis of Assisi, because he, abjured private property for himself, became like a patron saint of the socialists. I remember a Simpsons episode where they were saying, taking a quiz that says, most overrated saint, St. Francis of Assisi. The Fabian socialists, all the socialists adored St. Francis of Assisi because he gave up private property. Chesterton pointed out that what St. Francis of Assisi did was not condemn private property. He recognized it as a good. What he said was private property is getting in the way is getting between me and God. Even though it's good, I will not do it for myself. I am giving up private property for myself because it's a distraction. And in fact, this is what Jesus said in, remember the incident of the rich young man who comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to gain eternal life or become saved?" I forget exactly how he said it. And this is in all the synoptics. And Jesus said, "Keep the commandments." And the rich young man said, "I have done this from my youth. What more can I do?" And Jesus said, "Well, then go and take all you have, sell it, and give it to the poor, and come and follow me." Now,
Does that mean that no one should own private property or that private property is evil? Well, if it is, then Jesus lied. Because the young man asked, "What must I do to gain eternal life?" Keep the commandments. Nowhere in the commandments does it say give up private property. In fact, "Thou shalt not steal" actually affirms private property.
Yeah.
So what Chesterton pointed out was that what St. Francis did was show how good private property is by giving it up. So that, but in ordinary civil life, we can't all run off into the, into the desert to become hermits or live like St. Francis. Private property is a good. I mean, when you talk about your worldly goods, you're not saying worldly evils.
Yeah, when they say that we would own nothing and be happy, well, then you don't own your clothes then, huh? Because that would be private property as well, right?
Yes. And you'll be as happy and carefree as those darkies dancing outside the plantation and serenading old Massa, in the evenings. They owed nothing. They got what they needed, didn't they?
Yeah, and to Mike's point, you're talking about slaves, human beings whose labor, what they produce from it, they don't have any claim to it. Someone else has taken it. And so when you say no one will own, then you're also saying you don't even own your own labor. So therefore, if society determines that society needs you to be doing some dangerous, difficult work, and don't expect compensation because you don't own it. You are not due compensation. It's what we say we're going to give to you. So people, I think, have viewed property something evil. But I think there's also, it's kind of an ironic thing, is that the word ownership has been used, for example, say we must take ownership of the mission of this organization. Really feel that it is ours and we're responsible. And this is ironic because it's saying we need to have that psychology of ownership, but forget about the rights of ownership.
Well, do you remember that movement during the summer where the woke movement was still going on, but in the NBA, they got rid of the word owner of a team because of wokeness reasons.
They don't have an owner. This is news to me. So I think that we need to understand ownership in its fullest sense, that you can't just leave out the rights portion of it and the responsibilities. It is also, I think it's a valid thing to also stress that when you have that sense of responsibility over something, that tends, if everyone has that sense of responsibility together, you will tend to have a better result rather than people just going off in a million different directions, following their own self-interest and not concerning themselves about what is the purpose we share, what are the values we share. Because we have to have something that we can all come together on. And when we're talking about who gets the benefits of the goods and services produced, it gets really chaotic and arbitrary if you don't know, if you can't say, I can measure what I'm due and I can see what you're due, and we all agree to this very simple, logical formula. Mm-hmm. If you produce it, you then deserve to have, in terms of what you get from it, that proportionate amount. So it takes, anytime you increase the amount of arbitrariness, then that becomes a way someone who has that ability to make the decision for you can get pretty abusive about it. I don't like, the way you dress. I don't like your religion. I don't like this or that. And so, regardless of whether you produce more than the next person, it's up to me, or the delegated representatives of the collective or the government.
Yeah. Part of the problem is, what, for instance, C.S. Lewis mentioned when he said, there is massive confusion today on what you mean by my. For instance, you talk about my country, my family, my dog, my wife, my money. Same word. And some people will think that, oh, well, my means the same thing in all of these. Well, there was a famous legal commentator named Wesley Hofeld back in the late 19th, early 20th century, and he saw that lawyers and judges were using words, and these are the people who should have been using words in the most precise manner possible. Because, as you know, or may not know, a single comma or a misspelled word in a legal document or in a law case can mean all the difference between justice and injustice, depending on how you do it. Hofeld noted that judges and lawyers were sometimes changing the meaning of words 2 or 3 times in a single sentence and apparently not realizing they were doing so. He even wrote articles for the Yale Law Review that appeared as a book after his death, Fundamental Legal Conceptions. I've read it. It is one of the toughest books you'll ever read, simply because, in some respects, you have to back off from and realize, oh, I've been making this same mistake over and over, using what in logic is called the fallacy of equivocation, a word that means one thing in this context and a completely different thing in this other context, and saying them as if they were the same. Property and my and own can mean different things, and you have to be very precise, especially when you're talking about actual human beings, their dignity and thus their natural rights and the ability to exercise them, which of course in the just third way framework and in economic personalism means in the ideal world everyone would own capital, and that which means that in that instance ownership means control and enjoyment of the fruits, and by enjoyment of the fruits, the usufruct, if you want to use the Latin, control and the income. And because I am the owner, I get it, not you, not somebody who the state takes it as and redistributes it as the UBI or the Great Reset or largesse or freebies for everybody or goodies for the gang or whatever. It doesn't. No, I own it. And as long as I don't use it to harm myself, other individuals, groups, or the common good as a whole, I should be free to do exactly what I please with it, within this, the established norms of morality.
Isn't it funny that the guys pushing for this, they're not going to give up their property?
Sometimes they do, but they do it in a way that makes other people dependent on them.
But then I would argue maybe they haven't given up their power. If someone is dependent on them, they're still controlling.
So, well, given the importance of, let's say, keeping property and power, ownership, control, etc., together for people becoming more fully human, how well would you say the just third way of economic personalism and the reset conform to this moral necessity of keeping ownership and control together?
I'd say they're pretty much polar opposites. One is saying we can run an economy or society in a way where there's no personal connection to what is produced and what is distributed. So you lose that concept when we talk about the 3 principles of economic justice. Your principle of participative justice, how you contribute, how you participate in the economy, then that dictates distributive justice, which is what are you entitled to out of what was produced, or the value of what was produced, or the income. And so you've lost those 2 elements of economic justice. And you're also, by saying this, you bring the third part into question, which is the principle of social justice, which at any level of society or the common good, it operates in order to ensure that each individual at that level has equal access to all these institutions that were developed to enable humans to become more human and more liberated. So the just third way, or economic personalism, has those very clear principles of economic justice. Whereas I would be hard put to say what are the principles of economic justice under the Great Reset, except for what Kelso, when he distinguished between justice and charity, it would be a system that's based to each, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Okay, and that's going to leave, rather than the person being able to decide that, how much they want to participate or contribute and expect a reward for that. Now it's kind of left up to who knows whom. And I think it's fascinating that these guardians who are proposing this idea, they are the wealthiest people in the entire world, or the most powerful. So, it's rather than saying, we're going to determine for you, we're going to keep watch over the system, we would say, under economic personalism, each person must be the guardian, not only of what they are doing justice, but to every level of the common good. And that's the social justice. And the act of social justice says that each person is actually responsible to organize with other individuals to correct defects in the social order or the economy or whatever level of the common good.
Yeah. On a more mundane level, although I can assure you, looking at my image on this thing, that is not a halo over my head.
Dude, you just pure angelic spirits around you.
Oh, of course.
You may need to adjust your sunlight blocker, Mike.
I try, but it just gets worse. Maybe it's an excuse to finally get those drapes I've been promised for the past couple of decades here.
You're right.
Michael moved his office to the star where Bethlehem and the manger and the stars right outside.
Anyway, on a more mundane level, despite my halo and the fog there, to me, in practical terms, the Great Reset wants to put into place a system that has never worked, despite the most heroic efforts imaginable to make it work. I mean, the Soviet Union tried everything to make this system work. It killed millions of people to try to make it work. Nazi Germany did the same thing. Throughout the 19th century, you had all kinds of failed utopian experiments, ended in disaster. And it still doesn't work, and yet people keep insisting, all you have to do is put in more money and try harder. Or, alternatively, get rid of those reactionaries and the capitalists or the whatever, or the wrong-minded socialists, or those religious people, or those irreligious people. They're all getting in the way. What they're not looking at is that the system cannot work.
Isn't that what they always say, though? I mean, just socialism failed because we didn't implement it the right way.
So, yes, they keep insisting, oh, but you didn't do it right. Well, maybe it's because there's no right way to do it. I mean, how many different ways are there to kill somebody in the right way? Or I should say murder somebody in the right way.
Yeah,
I
would also point out that socialism is a reaction to the defects of capitalism.
In part. Socialism was put in not to replace capitalism. Some of the earliest socialists were capitalists themselves. But it was specifically directed at the institutions of the old order, most especially the Catholic Church. In fact, the original name for socialism was the democratic religion. They were going to replace, church, state, and family with this monolithic entity, even though it might be, atomistic little entities all over the place. But, get rid of the family, get rid of organized religion, get rid of traditional political arrangements, and everything will be perfect. Nobody will own everything. Everyone will be taken care of. Our guardians will do this, that, and the other thing for us. We won't own but life will be absolutely perfect and we'll be all happy.
And then John Lennon's Imagine will be playing 24/7.
Oh my God, that is such a captivating tune, and it's so easy to start singing the lyrics. Yeah,
but to finish what I was going to say, for the just third way of economic personalism, every single part of that has worked. The big task, of course, will be basically a social engineering one, not in the way that Keynes or these others meant social engineering, but how do we work with our institutions to try to fit the different parts of the just third way together so that they work in a harmonious way and enhance the dignity of every single human being? I mean, there's no part of economic personalism you can point to and say that doesn't work because it's never worked. No, every single one has worked. Of course, the one that is most obvious to me is the financing. This is the way commercial banks and central banks were set up to operate. Monetize your future wealth. And then when the future wealth becomes present wealth and becomes functioning and generates income, repay the financing. I mean, you make a promise, you keep the promise, and then you get the income for yourself. Instead of trying to scrimp and save your whole life to accumulate money savings to buy what someone else has. No, it's called forming capital. You get an idea that will work, and you make promises to people to say, when this becomes productive, I will pay you back what you lent me, or I will pay you for the land that you just gave me, or the machinery that you just gave me. And then after you're paid off, then I will enjoy the income for myself. I will have power over my own life. I will have control over it. I don't have to worry about somebody else telling me what to do.
Right, and I think that's the basic notion of how someone can become an owner when they have nothing to start with, is that if you can show that you have what's called a feasible business project, that you know that there will be customers with money who will buy the products at a certain point in time that's reasonable to whoever may be lending you money, then it's that that predictability, that high level of predictability that there will be something to sell and thereby generate profits, that you know that it's that future stream of profits is what is paying off your loan, not the fact that you have enough assets right now in order to use those. So, because for someone who is poor or just living paycheck to paycheck, they can't accumulate enough in order, for example, to buy shares or to buy capital. So, to harken back to earlier in our conversation where Mike was talking about how the founders of this country, some of them did not want to give the vote to people who had no property. That the reaction against that is, we're here today, and I don't think most people would agree that those of us who don't have productive property should not vote. So that right to the vote was given and disconnected from the notion of property. But what was really the missing element that would have connected us back to not only the right to vote, but the right to obtain productive property? And here, I guess this is a double use of the word, but to be able to exercise inherent property rights in something that will produce an income for me. And that was what George Mason had put into the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Very important. This was a historic near miss, that I believe, would be in a different position today in the world would be if we had followed what George Mason was saying, which was eliminated by Jefferson. And that was the reason government is formed is to protect each person's life, liberty, with the means to acquire and possess property in order to pursue security and happiness. It's with the means of acquiring and possessing property that was the very subtle missing thing that was taken out of the Declaration of Independence. So if we have a workable means, and this is what Louis Kelso came up with. He was a lawyer by profession, but he was a corporate finance lawyer. So he was thinking about, for example, how do the rich get more capital? Well, it helps that they have assets to begin with, because they, more than using those existing assets, they can get loans based on the fact that they have assets that could be seized if the loan doesn't happen, if they default on the loan. So they have that security that the lender is looking for. So they never even have to actually use those accumulations from the past. It's sort of the safety blanket. So Kelso said for the non-owner who's borrowing and, expecting to pay off a loan with the profits, what happens if that loan does not get repaid? Well, as an alternative to having all that heap of past savings or assets, the non-owner, if they have access to capital credit insurance, which means an insurance on that loan, then that becomes a means of repaying the lender if that loan goes bad. So if you have a national program, and this, when I say national, that means every citizen, man, woman, and child, having now an equal right to the capital credit that can finance the future capital formation of the country. So you project, okay, this, the American economy, we can see will be growing at a rate of $3 trillion more per year. That's the needs, the new capital needs. So we take that amount, and we determined that it was roughly $3 trillion. And then we look at, well, how many men, women, and children are in this country? And now we say citizens. And getting from citizen to person, we can do this, but we're now going to just assume we're in the legal system that exists right now, only for America. So once you know what that number is of citizens, and you divide it into that total growth needs of capital growth needs for the coming year, then you can say, okay, that would work to, it was about $12,000 of new capital growth that each person could have access to finance if they had the means. So then the next question is, what is the means? And that is where Kelso's understanding, he shared this with Moulton, Harold Moulton, who was the president of the Brookings Institution, he was like the counterpart to Keynes. And he got forgotten even by the Brookings Institution. They don't want to touch him. Okay, he was there for 20 years, and it's a funny thing. It's like he never existed. But his notion was that you don't have to finance growth, and you shouldn't finance new growth out of past savings. And why is that? Because if you don't spend the income that you produce in order to buy the goods and services someone else produced, well, that messed up their projections in terms of what they could expect in terms of profits. And it also, it tends to enrich the same people over and over. It does not allow for new people to come into the ownership game. So Kelso envisioned this system whereby through capital credit, each person could acquire those assets that would be paid off by the future profits that are attributed to those assets, and thereafter they would have a current stream of income from those assets. And he came up the alternative to collateral, which is the capital credit insurance. Now, the other part of this equation is you got credit. What is the mechanism by which the investor puts money into the company that they're going to buy shares in, and the shares represent the new growth? The company can't use a promissory note to go out and buy the new equipment. The company needs some form of spendable money. So money is also this is an essential part of the whole system, is understanding money, that it becomes, there are many ways to define it, but Kelso pointed out this is a way of measuring the value of transactions. So we have a number that we can determine. You're going to need a standard of value, so you know that every unit of the new currency going out, it's, you know what its value is. It isn't like, oh, tomorrow it's now 10 times more than it was today. So in this overall system, and this involves how you create money that has value behind it, and this is one of the problems with the Great Reset, is what's going to stand behind the money in that system. If you're basically using government to dole everything out to people, and the government, if it continues doing what it's doing now, which is to continually spend more than it's able to take in, it's going to go further and further into debt. And what it's doing now, which I presume is what will continue with the Great Reset, is that the government debt becomes what stands behind your money. So that's what is behind it right now, is government debt, and it's just getting ridiculous. And what happens is then you lose that moral connection between, I promised to deliver something of value. Well, now it's becoming what really, as long as the government can tax Americans, that's what the full faith and credit of the government, that's what it is. At some point, we'll collect enough taxes that we will make good on what this piece of paper says. And we're just saying, no, money should be based on the things that are produced in the economy. You can put a measurement. It takes away centralized control over determining value. That's, what the marketplace and consumers and producers having that, the give and take to determine what the market price is. So I think that was my transition into, the question of who pays for this. What is this? And I'll let Mike expound on that.
I was just going to say that, as you can see, the money question is a little bit complicated. The danger, of course, in getting an extremely condensed summary like this is that sometimes it can be a little bit misleading, because most people, the first time they hear something, will pick and choose what they want to hear, that sort of thing. And to put in a free plug, read the parts in Economic Personalism on money so that you can keep referring to it whenever you come to a bump in the road. Because frankly, every time you say something about money that people don't understand, it's a bump in the road. Most people have deified money to the point where they won't even listen to common sense about it, even from traditional, money type people.
Right. And Mike is pointing out something, that money system has gotten so complicated because we don't know what is standing behind the money. We don't really know what it is. We start to value it as a thing, as a commodity, versus it as a social tool that helps us grow as a society and grow as individuals. So that whole area is, that is a topic that can be discussed, a series of shows in itself. Yeah. But it is key to answering what George Mason was talking about with the means of acquiring and possessing property.
Yeah.
And I'll be the bad guy. I'll say I agree with that idea of not letting somebody vote that doesn't own anything, because that eliminates all those 18, 19, 20, 22-year-olds that do nothing besides get loaded and then go out and start pushing. Hey, I want Bernie. I'm with Bernie because he's going to give me, or the Obama lady. Where'd you get that money? I got my Obama money. I don't know his stash. Remember that one?
To address your point there, if they know, as soon as they, as their children, starting from when they're able to understand words, if they understand that something is mine, and this is something that you're not rich overnight. This is something that grows. You have to understand how it grows. You are responsible for it. Then I think that whole question of the 18-year-old who says, money be damned, I don't need it, I don't care about it. Well, I think they're going to feel differently if they actually have something they've been accumulating year after year, and hopefully understanding how that happened and knowing the risk. They're going to feel that they have something to lose. At that point, all this, the talk about the government or the collective giving you what you need, that's going to be less realistic and relevant.
You said that R word. You'll never hear the following at a rock concert. After somebody yells out, "We want personal freedom!" Woo! Also, we want responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Basically, the bottom line here is, despite all the technicalities of money creation and everything else, and the complexity of the system, whoever finances capital owns it, and whoever owns it controls it. The whole point of the just third way is to make it possible for as many people as possible to own capital, thereby control the capital, and thereby gain control over their own lives so that they can become more fully human by exercising their natural rights and becoming virtuous and all that good stuff you learned in Philosophy 101, or you should have learned in Philosophy 101.
That those 18, 19, 20, 21 years did not take.
Well, no, you can't do that because those are dead white European males. We have to get rid of all those classics or update them.
I actually saw a tweet today say that somebody was happy that they got rid of the Odyssey.
Yeah, that was the Wall Street Journal yesterday. They quoted somebody who is a Facebook friend of mine, John Delarose, who said, what the heck is going on? I mean, how do you do this? People need to read these things, even if only to understand their own language right now. I mean, this is why I have a problem with people updating classics and getting rid of all the old ideas and putting in their new ideas and attributing it to the old author. I mean, who needs Homer? We have our Odyssey today. What's an Odyssey?
Yeah, what's an Odyssey? You would know what James Joyce was talking about.
It's a new video platform.
Actually, Don, that's a very bad example because no one knows what James Joyce is talking about anyway in Ulysses.
Well, at least you have some cultural reference.
So again, ladies and gentlemen, when we started this, I read this and all the other books that Schwab put out. He's got another one coming out in February. And I haven't read this yet, but I've been listening to Michael and Don talk about this for a while now. And this is almost the opposite of this, where this is the opposite of this. So this kind of answers this. So in a sense, we're talking about a solution to how we combat this. Now, our numbers are small. We are not as funded as he is. We'll probably lose, but we got to fight.
No, if you believe that great is truth and mighty above all things, we will win. I can't say when or how, but we will. I mean,
the main idea is to push the ideas. Is the other Sam Adams, who I thought was a scumbag. He had a great line of. And he's named for a beer, but he destroyed his family's beer brewery. It's amazing. I don't know who came up with that marketing idea.
Yeah, just a comment, Stephen.
Well, I was just going to go with the whole, it doesn't take majority, but a tireless minority hell-bent on setting brush fires in people's minds.
Exactly. But another thing to remember is when you say that we will win, we're going to win for everyone. And that's the thing, is that this is something that is meant to lift up everyone and not exclude anyone. So that is really the choice of a system that is looking to empower each and every human being versus having some people in control and making decisions for the rest of us.
Yeah, well, Michael, Don, appreciate it as always, and we'll do another one next time on. I think you're wanting to do one on the addresses Pope Francis' concerns of offending anyone against human dignity.
Well, the idea, and we can toss it around a little bit more, is right now Pope Francis seems to be advocating something that we don't think will work. What we'd like to say is that there is something that is fully consistent with natural law and thus with Catholic social teaching, We call it economic personalism, but we think it's a much better option than the Great Reset or any variation on it. It's a simple presentation, at least we hope it is. It basically what we've been saying all along.
But in fewer words.
Needs to hear it, that's all.
Amen.
Let's just say it in a fewer words.
Well, till next time. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Steve.